The headlines are everywhere right now. The Ebola case, allegedly in the United States. Of course, there's been news recently about sort of a difficulty with Ebola big time in some parts of Africa. And so obviously people are going to freak out about this. I mean, there's folks posting this everywhere on Facebook. That's where I first saw it. It's at the top of the Drudge Report, etc. The story is from ABC News that
this happens about every year. Is that about right?
What, an Ebola case in the
No,
US?
the H1N1 bird flu.
Oh, some kind of freak out.
Ebola, whatever freak out. There's always some medical freak out going on. And
was it like mad cow disease once,
Mad
right?
cow disease, that's another good one. Yep,
Yeah.
I forgot that Creutzfeldt-Jacobs syndrome or whatever it's called. I mean, it happens all the time. It's the thing that the media gets to sort of beat the drum about. And consider for a second, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but when you start trotting out reasons to keep the state, one of them will be we must have the state because that way the CDC can lock down the borders when the next big plague hits.
Well, that's what I saw.
The plague hasn't hit yet.
Well, that's what I saw on Facebook when a friend of mine posted a news story about this Ebola case in the United States. One of the first comments from someone I didn't know was, "That's what we need to have the Border Patrol get down there. We need to put the troops on the border and stop everyone from coming in here."
That's right. And it was also drug-resistant tuberculosis. Remember that one? That one was going to wipe us all out. Yeah, leprosy. That's another one. I've heard that one coming down from the border. There's always something out there that's the next big thing.
Right.
Have you guys heard about the rumors of Ebola being a bioweapon that has escaped from a U.S. biological weapons facility?
I've heard that one. Yeah.
Have you heard that one, Mark?
Yes, that's one of the things that sort of the rumors that are spreading in Africa, though.
I don't buy it.
I believe it. I believe it.
No,
I haven't researched it, but I believe it.
Horse crap.
I don't believe you. I don't believe that you believe it. Because if this is a bioweapon, it's a pretty terrible bioweapon, right? It's not really that contagious. And that's one of the things I wanted to cover here today.
They've got smallpox at the CDC. You're aware of that, right? Like, if they want to go get you, they can just release that. They've actually found, I've seen a news story recently where the bubonic plague has been found again.
Whoa.
If they want to let something go,
Is that the Black Death?
Yes, it was from fleas, though, and I don't think it's going to spread as well as it used to. If they want some aerosolized killer, I'm sure they can find it. They can. All they really need to do is juice up the flu. That kills a lot of people. The flu will kill more people in the United States than Ebola will kill in the world.
That's, I think, that's a fair prediction.
But you will see nothing about that on the news. More people will be.
Well, they still tell people to get your flu shot, that kind of thing. I've never gotten a flu shot.
They tell you to do that, but flu shots make me incredibly ill. And then people will call in and say, "No, you're wrong. The flu shot didn't make you ill."
All right. So when you saw the Ebola headlines, were you frightened? Do you know about Ebola? Because I honestly didn't know much about Ebola. I'd seen the headlines over, something terrible is happening in Africa. And I just thought, oh, that's horrifying. I'm sorry to hear that for those folks, but it didn't really concern me. And, of course, when I saw the headlines like, Ebola case discovered in the United States, well, I went and I looked, what is Ebola anyway? Well, we can find that out for you here in a moment. We'll share a little bit more from Wikipedia about that. They touch on it here in the ABC News article, but the word is that the first Ebola case has been diagnosed in the United States. But don't worry, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Dr. Tom Friedman says there is no doubt we will stop it here. The patient apparently left Liberia on September 10th, arrived in the United States on September 20th, sought medical help on September 27th, and was put in isolation on September 28th. Tests confirming Ebola came back today. And let's see, the White House was even briefed about this. I don't know why this stuff is not.
Hey, Mr. President, did you hear somebody in Texas got Ebola?
Frieden stressed the patient was not sick on departure from Liberia or upon arrival in the U.S., and the disease can only be contracted by someone exhibiting symptoms of the disease. I think they mean contracted from someone exhibiting symptoms of the disease. And
well, that's not optimal.
The Ebola virus disease, according to Wikipedia, or Ebola hemorrhagic fever, or simply Ebola, is a disease of humans and other primates caused by an Ebola virus. Symptoms start 2 days to 3 weeks after contracting the virus, with a fever, sore throat, muscle pain, and headaches. Sounds like the flu. Typically, vomiting, diarrhea, and rash follow, along with decreased function of the liver and kidneys. Around this time, affected people may begin to bleed, both within the body and externally. The virus may be acquired upon contact with blood or bodily fluids of an infected animal. So basically, so long as you don't have sex with or do blood brothers or something with someone who has Ebola, you're likely not going to get it. It has never been documented to have spread through the air, so you don't have to worry about that. That's the big scary one, right? Like,
right.
If something is, if you cough and then somebody else catches something that could kill them, that would be a scary bioweapon.
That's
Ebola, probably not a bioweapon.
The term for that is aerosolized.
Yeah. Fruit bats, they say, are believed to be a carrier and may spread the virus without being affected. Once human infection occurs, the disease may spread between people as well, as was mentioned with blood or bodily fluids. Male survivors may be able to transmit the disease via semen for nearly 2 months. That's if you survive Ebola. To make the diagnosis, typically other diseases with similar symptoms such as malaria, cholera, and other viral hemorrhagic fevers are first excluded, and to confirm said diagnosis, blood samples are tested. So
they've been working on a serum for that, though. They go and get the blood of people who have survived and create a somehow isolate the antibodies out of it, create a serum. They've had what appears to be success. I mean, obviously you don't know science until you see science, but frankly, when you've got Ebola, you probably don't care that much about science. Just get me something that might work.
Prevention includes decreasing the spread of disease from infected animals to humans. This may be done by checking such animals for infection and killing and properly disposing of the bodies if the disease is discovered. Properly cooking meat and wearing protective clothing while handling meat may also be helpful, as are wearing protective clothing and washing hands when around a person with the disease. Samples of bodily fluids and tissues from people with the disease should be handled with special caution. So really, this is obviously not a bioweapon because it doesn't spread very effectively. The only way that this victim of Ebola could spread the Ebola is for you to have sex with them or for them to bleed onto you and possibly into an open wound or a cut or something like that. So not really something that needs to be trumpeted from the headlines as though this is, some sort of scary thing that could infect everyone. That's just not the case.
That's the way it seems to me. I've been watching it for some time. I'm not scared.
According to the Wikipedia page specifically related to the 2014 Ebola outbreak in West Africa, about 1,500 people have died.
Yikes.
So, yeah, that's a lot, but maybe not to be blaring from the headlines. 1,500 people in this whole 2014 outbreak is not. How many people do we lose on the highways every year? 30,000?
Quite a bit.
Like that.
Cigarette smoking, alcohol. I mean, this contributes to a lot more death. But also, I'm wondering how does
smoking your cigarette while you look at the internet and worry about Ebola.
Why? Now, is there any idea, Johnny Ray, on how 1,500 people did get it? I mean, were they all having sex with one another over time and they didn't know they were infected? Was it sharing needles? I mean, so I'm wondering, did they eat some sort of beast that had not been properly cooked?
Sex happens, man. Sex happens.
Sex happens.
I suspect that's what we're talking about here.
The U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases is located in Sierra Leone, Ian. That's how they all got it.
Oh, God.
Last segment, when we were talking about Ebola, I misrepresented the number of deaths. It's higher, about twice what I said.
So about 3,000 people.
Yes, and the further reading I did didn't give any clue as to why something that is ostensibly so hard to transmit is being transmitted so rapidly.
It's not hard
and
to transmit if you have sex, right? Like, so you're not
maybe eating bush meat.
Yeah, so if you're not eating safely cooked meat, that's another possibility. So, contacting things physically with Ebola, transmitting bodily fluids with those things will possibly get you Ebola.
Sanitation was a real problem in Western countries up until 100 years ago, maybe even less than that. And I mean, that's probably what we're dealing with here to some extent.
Right. So
I mean, I wish it wasn't the case. I wish everybody could live in, palatial middle-class homes with great running water and, great sewer and all those other things. Sadly, they do not.
yeah, and again, it's probably sex that has transmitted this.
Once it's brought into the home, then, nose wiping and all those things go on too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's not something you really have to worry about unless you're going to come in physical bodily fluid contact with somebody who has this. And right now in the United States, there's one identified case. But what I wasn't clear on in reading about Ebola is, how long does it take? You obviously have initial symptoms. The Wikipedia story was telling us about those. There are some initial symptoms, but those would seem like symptoms of the flu. You won't necessarily think you have Ebola from getting the initial symptoms. It's when you start bleeding internally and other things
that'll let you
get
know.
A little more serious. And by that time, if you've had sex with people within, let's say it's a week that it takes to get I don't know what the amount of time is, but there's obviously some amount of gestation time or whatever you want to term it. If you're having sex with people within that period of time, you're probably contagious there. So maybe that's what has gone on, is there's been people that have had sex, they didn't know they had Ebola, and so then they transmitted the Ebola through the sexual activity. But your comments are certainly welcome. And by the way, we are listened to in West Africa via our free-to-air satellite feed. If anyone is there who would like to comment, feel free to contact us on Skype. Our Skype username is
probably pretty late there, huh?
LRN.FM. Yeah, it is. It's at least past midnight over there right now. Alex, you're on Free Talk Live from St. George.
Hey, guys. I just wanted to offer input on why, or possible reasons why the virus contracts there in Africa. From what I understand, there's a ritual where you kiss the dead at a burial service, and a lot of the culture there, they don't necessarily, listen to the advice of the doctors. They don't have very much trust there, so they contract a lot of times that way.
Wow. Okay. Kissing the dead could be a really bad habit. Might want to break that one.
Yeah, I recommend against this.
Thanks for sharing that. Anything else you want to throw out there?
No, that's it.
Thanks, Alex, for the call tonight. Brian's in Wyoming. You're on Free Talk Live. Hello, Brian.
Yeah. Hi, guys. I think you're possibly maybe throwing out some misinformation there on Ebola.
Okay.
It really is a lot easier to contract.
Huh? Are you still there? Brian?
Hello?
Yeah, you just kind of faded out there for a moment. You're saying it's easier to contract than we were making it out to be?
Oh, yeah. No, you can contract it through sex,
Stand by. I want you to tell me more about that here in a moment. Apparently, you could kiss the dead and possibly contract it that way. More coming up. We'll see what Brian has to say. Take your calls as well. Free Talk Live. Now, Brian is in Wyoming with us here. We just heard a moment ago that apparently one of the possible methods that Ebola has spread so quickly in West Africa is through a ritual involving kissing the dead. But there are some other ideas here we'll share with you here in a moment. But Brian, you said we might have been misinforming, or go ahead with your thoughts. Do we have Brian in Wyoming? Brian in Wyoming.
Yeah, hello?
Hi, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say this is the zombie apocalypse or anything like that. I just wanted to clear up maybe a couple of facts
clear it up.
I know of.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it is transmitted through saliva, which I think, that's pretty much what's happening in Africa, is people sneezing, and, I wasn't aware of that ritual of kissing the dead, but, it does spread, through blood and saliva. But Ebola, there's not just one form of Ebola either. There's been one even back in the 80s that transmitted through a research facility where the monkeys came down with it, and so basically they quarantined off all the monkeys, and then the government came and killed off all the monkeys in that one area because they didn't think it was able to spread through the air. And what happened was then another section of monkeys started all dying. So they ended up having to shut down the whole facility. And the only way that they could tell that it had spread was through the ventilation system. Actually, they made a movie called, I think it was starring like Dustin Hoffman or something like that, called Outbreak, back in the 90s or something. But that really did happen back in the 80s. And then not too long ago, they actually had they were testing Ebola on monkeys again up in Canada. And what happened was the monkeys were all dying, so they took care of the monkeys, and then all of the pigs. Mark could maybe be familiar with that. The pigs actually came down with Ebola. So the only way that these scientists could figure out that it could spread was from, through the air from the monkeys to the pigs. So as far as I know, this whole thing that's going on right now is not. It's not like an airborne form, I don't think, from what I've read, but you have to realize that it does have like a 21-day gestation period, which means you could be infected with it, and you might just think you have a cold.
Right.
And and then you sneeze or whatever, and then that sneeze gets on somebody or something. That's how it's spreading there in Africa.
That's how colds spread.
Now. What's that?
That's how colds and flu spread.
Yeah, exactly, and that's how it's spreading there, and that's why the doctors, I mean, how they're bringing the doctors back here to the United States. That's why they're getting it, is because they were thinking, just like Ian was saying before. That's the only reason I called, was he was saying,
doctors are coming into contact with a lot more fluids than you and I would come in contact with, right?
Oh yeah, of course, but this is not just spreading through sexual contact.
Oh, that's not all we were saying. We said
it too many times. I would agree that we probably should have talked about other fluids.
Well, no, we did say it spreads through bodily fluids, and obviously sex is one of the most common ways that people transmit bodily fluids.
Yeah, but you can literally catch this strain of Ebola that's getting ready to shut down a whole entire African nation off of just sneezing. So it's got a 21-day gestation period, which means you might not even know you have it for 21 days. That's what that's why people can go around and why it's so dangerous. But I just
Brian,
wanted to
thank
clear
you
that up.
for the call tonight. Appreciate
I'm not a
hearing from
doctor.
you.
Do the research.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly we're just a talk show, and nobody here's an expert. We're just reading Wikipedia. So there you go. Thanks for the call tonight. But yeah, we did say that it was bodily fluids, and in fact, when you go a little further in the Wikipedia story here, and this is about this particular entry is on the Ebola virus disease, which apparently is one of the Ebola viruses out there. Human-to-human transmission can occur via direct contact with blood or bodily fluids from an infected person, including embalming of an infected dead person, or by contact with objects contaminated by the virus, particularly needles and syringes. So I suggested maybe sharing needles could be a factor. The potential for widespread Ebola virus or EVD, Ebola virus disease infections is considered low, as the disease is only spread by direct contact with the secretions from someone who is showing signs of infection. The symptoms limit a person's ability to spread the disease, as they're often too sick to travel. Because dead bodies are still infectious, local traditional burial rituals may spread the disease. Nearly 2/3 of cases in Ebola in Guinea during the 2014 outbreak are believed to be due to burial practices. So
I would love to know this burial practice.
Well,
maybe it's the dead kissing that we're talking about.
Washing bodies by hand is what I'm reading in National Geographic.
Okay.
Semen may be infectious in survivors for up to 3 months. It's not entirely clear how an Ebola outbreak is initially started. The initial infection is believed to occur after Ebola virus is transmitted to a human by contact with an infected animal's bodily fluids. So, does that mean that this was started by someone having sex with an animal? Could be. Or some kind of butchering practice that was unclean. If you're not doing the proper protection during the butchering of an animal that has Ebola virus, then that could start the infection up. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE, but it's not saying that sneezing has been the cause of the issue there. It's saying 2/3 in Guinea during 2014 were due to the burial practices. More coming up. Right now, Ebola is on the table for discussion. Is this a scary thing? Should people be freaking out? Because right now the headlines certainly make it look like people should be. I mean, this is the top story. It seems all over the place at the moment, is that there's been an Ebola case in the United States. But do you really need to be scared about this? Or is it just something you should be aware of how this thing works? Is it as dangerous as the news media might have you believe by the alarmist method of their communicating this news story?
Well, Americans love to feel safe. I mean, I don't know if it's how it is around the rest of the world, but it's really important to Americans. When you consider that so many other things in life in the United States are much more dangerous than Ebola is likely to be, then I think it helps put it in perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to continue here with your calls and thoughts, but we're also sharing some information. Of course, Wikipedia news story, or not news story, but the Wikipedia article about Ebola virus disease, aka Ebola hemorrhagic fever, EVD or EHF, is very, I think, informative and useful to learn a thing or two about. It is bodily fluids and blood that is the method of transmission here. Our last caller suggested that simple sneezes could transmit Ebola, and I don't doubt that that is true. The claim here in the article, however, says that it's burial practices in Africa, and in Guinea specifically, the 2014 outbreak. Claim here is that nearly 2/3 of the cases are believed to be due to burial practices. In addition to that, they say here one of the primary reasons for spread is that the health systems in the part of Africa where the disease occurs are functioning poorly. Medical workers who do not wear appropriate protective clothing may contract the disease. Hospital-acquired transmission has occurred in African countries due to the reuse of needles and lack of universal precautions. Some healthcare centers that are caring for people with this disease do not even have running water. So if you have no running water,
I guess you go to the healthcare center you can get, right?
That could be, that might make washing one's hands difficult. And it's horrifying to think that you check into a hospital without Ebola, you could check out with Ebola in a situation like that.
Well, in the United States, you can certainly do it with MRSA.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think what's worrisome about this is that these Ebola outbreaks are usually sort of confined to a village or some small area out in the country, and they rarely spread like this has spread across borders, 4 or 5 countries. And, I'm still a little worried. You guys have not allayed my fears of Ebola yet.
Well, I don't see you wearing a face mask. Airborne transmission has not been documented during EVD outbreaks. That's Ebola virus disease. They are, however, infectious as breathable 0.8 to 1.2. There's a little U symbol. Is that micro?
Yes.
Something? Micro M? Micro, I don't know what that stands for. Laboratory-generated droplets.
I think that's a micrometer.
Yeah, it's very small. The virus has been shown to travel without contact from pigs to primates, although the same study failed to demonstrate similar transmission between non-human primates. Bats drop partially eaten fruits and pulp, then land mammals such as gorillas feed on these fallen fruits. This chain of events forms a possible indirect means of transmission from the natural host to animal populations, which has led to research towards viral shedding of the saliva of bats. Fruit production, animal behavior, and other factors vary at different times in places that may trigger outbreaks among animal populations. So definitely don't want to get bitten by a fruit bat. That could lead to Ebola.
I've managed to make it 43 years without that.
James in Jacksonville, Florida. Don't kiss any dead people. Don't handle dead bodies, especially of people that have Ebola. And also don't have sex with people that have Ebola. And try to stay away from someone who's sneezing with Ebola. Now, one thing that our caller earlier said is that there's like a 21-day gestation period for this thing where it's transmittable. The Wikipedia story here, and again, it's just Wikipedia. They have what they claim are citations on all these claims. So do you believe the claims in Wikipedia or the claims of a caller? I don't know. You should do your own research. But the claim here is that the disease is spread by direct contact with secretions from someone who's showing signs of infection. Now, I don't know if a sign of infection is a sneeze. So it's still... you want to be careful. James is in Jacksonville. You're on Free Talk Live. Hello, James.
Yes, yeah. Your previous caller was absolutely right. And the one where he was talking about the scientists in Canada, I don't know if he, said it good, but they were totally isolated from each other, the pigs and the monkeys. Mm-hmm. And I remember when that article came out back in 2012, and then it got brought up about 3 months ago, and everyone was like, shut up, fearmonger, conspiracy theorist. But to me, like he was saying, there's different forms of it, so we don't know what it is or how it got here. But there was an article that came out recently. It said over 200,000 people are here on visas from Ebola-infected countries. So, there's just a lot of different things that I'm concerned about, and one of them is the executive order that Obama did where he revised George Bush's executive order on quarantainable communicable diseases. I guess that's how you say it, is where he could literally come in if they think, but what he did was he changed it to a respiratory infection. And, that's whatever, that could be anything, but it was literally days before the doctors got here, the first doctors got here. And, he revises where if you have a respiratory, it came out on July 31st this year. So if you want to look it up, I'm on whitehouse.gov right now looking at it.
Are you saying the concern is that they'll use Ebola as an excuse to shut down areas of the United States?
Yeah, martial law. And another thing,
do you really think they need Ebola for martial law? I mean, don't you think that most Americans?
They really don't. But another thing I'm worried about is the vaccines, how much money is Big Pharma, whoever, is going to make on the backside, because George Soros is the one that's funding
first of all, there apparently is no vaccine.
Yeah,
for
they're working
Ebola.
on a serum, but they're not working on a vaccine.
Vaccine.
Serums are made out of blood.
I'm worried that it's going to turn into, I don't know, maybe not. But what I'm concerned with is one thing is that it can turn into, everyone has to get this, or you're going to be in a FEMA camp or something. I don't know. I don't know. The whole thing is just crazy that we would even let all this even happen to begin with.
What do you mean let all of it happen? What does that mean? You'd let what happen?
Ebola's been going on for a while, and we're still letting people come over here with visas that are from.
Oh, I see. You want to?
I see it as a conspiracy theory to shut down the borders, so that free people can't move to free places freely.
I'm sorry, James. Didn't you just 5 sentences ago say you were worried about shutting down swaths of the country and having a police state, and then a moment later you say you want to shut down the border? I mean, aren't you then calling for a police state?
What about all the diseases that we haven't seen in 40 years that are spreading through
What
this
about
country?
freedom, man? What about freedom to travel?
The same people you want to be protected from are the ones that are going to do the shutting down of the borders. Do you want Obama and his guards to be the ones that keep you safe by keeping others out while they keep you safe by keeping you in? The safest people in America are in prisons.
I want them to do why we pay taxes. I don't even think it's.
What does that even mean? That wasn't a responsive answer to Mark's question.
They should be guarding the border, yes, because now the borders are wide open.
No, they shouldn't be. If you care about freedom, then we should have borders that are wide open, and it's ridiculous to say that the borders are wide open. There's all kinds of border patrols and guard stations. Have you ever crossed the border? Have you ever crossed the border?
No.
Okay, then you don't know what you're talking about.
I've been thrown in jail for crossing the border.
You have no idea what you're talking about. Thank you, James, for the call. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. That's 855-450-3733.
I do think a well-planned incursion upon the border will likely work. I think that if you really want to get across, you'll probably get across.
Sure, but to say it's wide open is an inaccurate statement. There are guards and there are installations that stop thousands of cars, hundreds of thousands probably every single day in the United States. And it's very inconvenient, and it's very detrimental to our freedom to have these bureaucrats being able to stop us and demand where we're going and demand to know why and demand to search our cars. And I'm not okay with that because I like freedom.
If you're afraid of what's going on with Ebola, the last people you should trust to protect you from it is the government.
And I think the borders are kind of wide open because it's impossible to close them, and the harder you try to close them, the tighter you grasp your fingers, the more people are going to slip through it. It's unrealistic to close them, so you shouldn't try.
We'll come back with more. Your thoughts are welcome here at 855-450-FREE. It's Free Talk Live. Are you scared? We're talking about Ebola. There has been a case confirmed in the United States, or so say reports that are being just pointed out all over the place. The media is yelling all over about this. Facebook, it's blowing up. People are acting like this is a big deal. And is it really a big deal that this has happened? Well, courts, QZ.com, says stay calm and carry on, why it's nearly impossible for Ebola to spread in the United States. I'd like to share that story here in a moment, because that has been my thrust so far here tonight on the air, and that is that this is not a big deal. This doesn't really seem to be that transmittable. The Wikipedia article about the Ebola virus disease points out that the Ebola virus is transmitted by blood or bodily fluids of an infected animal. But yet somebody just called in at the end of the last hour to say that that there's an instance where Ebola has spread from pigs to primates, presumably through the air. We can talk about that. And then that led to sort of this fear-mongering idea. Johnny Ray has been, I think, joking with us, where he's suggested that this is some kind of a bioweapon being foisted upon the people of the earth by evil governments like the United States government. And then in the last caller that we had in the last hour, he suggested that this could be an excuse for the government to round people up and put them into camps if they don't submit to some sort of vaccination, which, as I understand it, there is no vaccine for Ebola. That doesn't exist. So you are welcome to call up here, bring up whatever you want. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. Of course, the contradiction of that last caller was that on one hand, he acted as though he was so afraid of having the government go around, round people up, maybe bring out the Bearcat and go house to house and destroy people's freedoms over this Ebola supposed threat. But then on the other hand, he wanted that very same government that he was so afraid of to lock down the borders, as though that the same government that would do thing A to you would somehow be effective at doing thing B, but not stepping on your freedoms. Because when they shut down the borders, guess what? That steps on your freedoms.
That's when you know you have a police state.
That's one example of why you that when you have a police state. But I
think we may already have a police state,
yeah.
And maybe the conspiracy is that this is the way to ramp up the police state. I don't think that Americans need much of an excuse to go for a police state, frankly.
Well, yeah, it's not implausible to believe that the government could use this and the fear that people have surrounding Ebola and what it could mean, that they could use that to ramp up a police state. I don't doubt that as a possibility. But to say that you want that same government to lock down the borders is calling for a police state. You can't say you don't want a police state on one hand and then call for a police state a moment later, which is what we heard last hour.
Doesn't make much sense.
No.
And regardless of what they say, they'll never shut down the borders because the allure of cheap labor is too great. So maybe they'll make a show of beefing up checkpoints or building a wall, and maybe they'll say they're shutting down the borders. But as long as politically connected business people want cheap labor near the border, then they're gonna be able to get it. It's gonna come through. The politicians are gonna help them out. They're just gonna lie to you about the borders being shut down.
Some people are saying they want the borders shut down entirely, meaning that no traffic whatsoever should come through or go through the borders, which is ridiculous because business has to be done. Products come across those borders. If people aren't coming across, products certainly come across.
That's real isolationism. People say here on Free Talk Live, because we want the military to get out of 130 nations across the world, that we are isolationists. Nope, that's isolationism.
Right. So here's a story from QZ.com. Stay calm and carry on, why it's nearly impossible for Ebola to spread in the U.S. Well, it's finally happened. The U.S. just got its first case of Ebola. Health officials have confirmed that a man recently admitted to a Dallas hospital has come down with the deadly virus, which has already killed more than 3,000 people, as Johnny Ray told us in the last hour, in West Africa. The patient was admitted based on symptoms and travel history. Presumably, he'd been in West Africa and is now being held in strict isolation, say officials. Actually, the story is he was from Liberia. Below are excerpts from an earlier Quartz piece on a New York patient suspected of carrying the Ebola virus that explores why Americans would do well to not panic. If your Twitter feed is anything like mine, news that Ebola might have turned up in Manhattan is freaking out a lot of Americans. This is a little older. The bits of commentary include that it's deadly, uncurable, has a 90% fatality rate, causes a hemorrhagic fever that eventually leads to a complete bleed out. Today's news merely amplifies the anxiety that's been building since word got out that folks infected with Ebola have moved to U.S. hospitals for treatment. Now, there's plenty of people who should be protecting themselves against Ebola's spread, and they live in West Africa. Those of us who are in the United States should feel comforted by the following facts. Here you go. Ebola is not airborne. It can only be spread through bodily fluids. The virus spreads when blood, semen, urine, vomit, feces, or other bodily fluids of an infected person come into contact with someone else's mucous membranes.
These people are just the mouthpieces of the New World Order.
It's not just any infected person, it's a symptomatic infected person. People can only catch Ebola from someone actually exhibiting symptoms. Those include vomiting, diarrhea, and in some cases hemorrhaging of mucous membranes such as nose, nail beds, and eyes. In other words, it's pretty hard to miss. It isn't curable, but people survive it. In fact, this outbreak has a 57% mortality rate, much lower than the oft-cited 90%. Victims die of organ failure and not blood loss. Oh, and that pig study they say here at QZ.com doesn't mean anything, which is what somebody had called about in the last hour.
It's disturbing, right? Like the idea that some pigs that are completely separated from some primates somehow came down with Ebola after the primates did?
Some people are citing a 2008 study showing airborne Ebola transmission from pigs to rhesus monkeys that were never in direct contact with each other. However, as Etiology explains, this experiment showed merely that pigs seem unusually good at spritzing the air with coughed-up viruses. Avoid Ebola-infected pigs, and you'll be fine. Nearly every hospital in the United States is equipped to treat Ebola patients and keep them in isolation. And the symptoms, once they're set in, are so aggressive that it's hard to do much of anything except head to the hospital.
Yeah.
Another reason for all the worry is that the media has tended to zero in on this outbreak's rapid spread and as being the deadliest in history. While both are true, that says way more about the quality of medical care in war-torn, poverty-stricken pockets of West Africa than it does about Ebola's virulence. Now, some of these places in Africa, especially Sierra Leone, Sierra Leone is one of the worst places to live in the world. It's right up there with North Korea as far as being a terrible place to live.
I've never been to Sierra Leone, but I have been to Haiti. I went to the Hospital Albert Schweitzer in Deschamps, Haiti. And the very fact that I can say those words means that I did it, because I certainly wouldn't be able to make that stuff up. And this place was a completely unair-conditioned block wall. It could have easily been a large butcher shop as a hospital. I don't want to be mean, but we're talking about conditions that are completely unlike what you think of when you say hospital.
Hey, and compare the American response with that of the Liberian hospitals, which are so packed they've had to turn away Ebola patients. The country is running out of rubber gloves, and the health ministry just dumped 37 Ebola-infected corpses in a swampy open hole near a so far relatively healthy village. So these are not first world problems. So I have to agree with QZ, their assessment here. I can't say that I'm frightened by this turn up of someone with an Ebola virus in the United States. And I'm not of the belief that Ebola is some sort of bioweapon, because if it were a bioweapon, it would be airborne. Although obviously the conspiracy theory is that there is some sort of airborne variant of this out there. There's no real evidence that we've seen for that whatsoever. Could they use this to shut down the streets of the United States? Sure. If people are scared, then the government can use that fear against you. They can.
Always.
They absolutely can and will use that fear to increase their power.
Governments use fear as leverage. Now, do they do false flags attacks? They do. I don't think they're responsible for 90% of the false flags they're accused of. I think you can apply incompetence to a problem far more often than you can, conspiracy.
The Guardian says the Ebola epidemic is spreading because the World Health Organization has had their budget cut.
All right, we'll come back with more here in moments. 855 450 free. And I don't think more government is the solution to this problem anywhere in the world. It's Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.